How's it going, everyone? In this video, I'm going to be doing a review of the book Atomic Habits by James Clear. So, Atomic Habits is best for those who want to learn a little bit more about habits and behavior change. Also, good for those who are interested in psychology and just generally understanding how environment shapes behavior. It's also going to be a good fit for those who are interested in success and efficiency because all of these things kind of tie in together with habits. Difficulty to digest. So, Atomic Habits is fairly easy to digest. Everyone should be able to get the main concepts with a single read through. There are some really nice summaries in there, as well as kind of some bullet points and some concepts that just tie everything together nicely. On to the key insights. So, Atomic Habits is basically James Clear's book on habits and habit formation, and a couple of other topics that are related to habit formation, like identity and environment shaping. So, all these things kind of tie in together to create a really deep dive on the idea of habits. The book kind of takes you from not knowing anything to being able to change your habits completely. So it's geared towards beginners a little bit, or people who haven't had much domain experience, but pretty much anyone, even those that are in the more advanced stages or have spent a lot of time thinking about or working on habits, are likely to pull out some useful nuggets. So it's going to be good for just anyone trying to get in on this topic of habit change. So, Atomic Habits pretty much starts out by making the case for building habits and why it's important. And there's an idea in the book about getting 1% better or 1% worse. And the idea is that while individual actions may not seem like they make much of a difference, and you may not be able to see the effects of these actions immediately or even in the short term, over the long term, these different habits and actions compound to have varying degrees of impact that are much higher than what we'd expect if we just look in the short term. So the argument here is basically that we should be working on positive habits so that we can get that trajectory working in our favor, and then, as time goes on, the outcomes are much better than what they would have been otherwise. To start this process, Clear argues basically that we need to understand what habits we already have, right? We need to know what things it is that we're currently doing so that we can figure out, okay, this thing is working, this thing's not, let's tweak this here, let's move this over there. The next part that the book kind of talks about a little bit is that building habits connects nicely, weaves nicely with the idea of identity. So when you have a particular identity, you take actions generally that are in line with that identity. And each action that you take kind of pushes you towards reinforcing that identity. So, for example, let's say that you think of yourself as someone who is fit. Well, every time that you exercise, you're reinforcing that identity. And anytime you're thinking about not working, this piece of identity around, oh, I'm someone who's fit, then pushes you towards taking an action. So that's one angle that we can kind of work towards, because this is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. This loop just goes back and forth, and that's one piece or one aspect of habit change and formation. Now, the majority of the book is focused on the process of habit change. And before it gets into the process, it kind of talks about what is the causal chain in an action, right? So the different pieces are basically there's a cue, a craving, a response, then a reward. So the idea here is that something happens, and then we desire something, and then we take action, and then we get rewarded for it, right? So one example might be, if you see some sort of food, right? That's the cue. Actually seeing the food is the cue. The craving is, oh wow, this would taste good. The response is to actually eat the food, and the reward is the flavor of the food. So these foods that taste good are going to reinforce sort of this loop and start becoming habitual. In essence, certain stimuli, certain things that you see create desire, and then when we act on that, that provides us some sort of benefit, some sort of value, and so we want to continue doing that in the future. Done enough times, we basically automate this process in our brain. Instead of thinking, oh, there's this piece of food here, do I want it or not, we just kind of skip a bunch of the cognitive pieces and go straight to food, eat. So that's when a habit forms. And by getting into this process and working on different pieces, we can control what habits form and how they gain strength over time. So Atomic Habits, after kind of explaining how habits form, breaks out a parallel set of ideas or set of actions that we can take to change our habits. So one of those is to make it obvious, another make it easy, make it attractive, and make it satisfying. These things are ways that we can make different parts of the process more appealing or easier or whatever else so that we engage in those actions more often. And as we build frequency, those habits build as well. So Clear talks about a number of ways that we can take some of these actions, right? So we can shape our environment, maybe change the cues that are coming in, how often we see certain things. We can get ourselves in the right culture or create the right kind of culture where the social pressures are working in our favor. Or we can look at kind of the genetic dispositions that we have and the pieces that we're naturally given and kind of work with those instead of working against those to help us get towards some of these more desired behaviors. There are also quite a few other tactics that are shared throughout the book. I'm just going to give one example, which is temptation bundling, and that's basically putting something desirable with something less desirable and kind of merging those two behaviors together. So, for example, something like, oh, if I finish writing a page of my book, then I get to watch an episode of the show that I really like. So you kind of fuse these two things together to make the less appealing task more appealing. And there are a number of different ways you can do this. A lot of other tactics that I'm not going to go into, they get covered in the book. But in essence, it's all about acting on this process and finding ways to increase your odds of doing a certain behavior so you can start building a habit. So the final opinion here is basically that Atomic Habits is a great book to read, especially if you're working on building habits. It's going to have something for pretty much everyone. It's going to have something that you can take out of it on the first read. So a good fit as if you have time or space in your reading schedule to get this on the list, I definitely recommend it. Other considerations. The only real other consideration here is the very, very end of the book. It seems like there is a bunch of different ideas thrown in that are not nearly as cohesive or well thought out or polished as the rest of the book, and it's all these bullet points. That particular piece of the book doesn't feel in the same realm or in caliber as the rest of it, so when you get to that point, you may want to skip it or not take as much stock. But it's just a very small sliver of the book compared to the whole thing. Overall, it's really, really a very good read and has a lot of useful practical information delivered in a nice, digestible way. All right, on to the applicable content. So here are a couple reflection questions. 1. What habit are you working on developing right now? 2. What identity or value does that habit feed? 3. How can you make it more obvious, easier, more attractive, or more satisfying? So, all in all, like I said, Atomic Habits, great book to read if you want to start learning some ways to tweak your habits, or if you already are decent at that, some extra tactics that you may not have heard about before. That's all I've got for this video. As always, if you have any questions, comments, topics you want me to cover, throw them down in the box below, and I'll get to them as soon as I can, and I'll see you next time.
You can check out more content at howtohappy.com. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you can stay up to date on the videos. We've also got a Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook that you can check out. Reflect, take action, and enjoy life. See you next time.